predictability and trust is really deeply important. China is taking a really interesting approach to building out its relationships with countries.
在达沃斯，澳大利亚新南威尔士大学学者伊丽莎白·瑟本提出一个问题：绿色能源为什么不只关乎环保，也会改写一国的安全和合作？
Yes, thank you. And look, I would really agree with Jane at the outset that I think there have really been two Davos, at least two, and in large part, you know, we're focused on the doom loop, and I love this concept. There's so much in it, and I agree with that dynamic. But I think in the Davos that I've spent most of my time in, we've been talking about a boom loop, I think, and really an economic boom. Certainly, we've seen enormous dynamism across emerging market economies, driven by China, of course, but also across Latin America and across the African continent. And this kind of boom loop is being driven by some really positive dynamics, by enormous investments in green energy, which is an incredibly positive message that I think needs to come out of Davos because, you know, we've heard a lot about going back to the fossil fuel era of the past, incredibly kind of regressive approach because we know about the intense political instability that is often associated with that fossil-fueled order. But imports, you can manufacture your energy security. This is a vital lesson. It's using the energy transition to boost economic security, building and scaling these new green energy, high-tech, export-oriented industries, an enormous lesson for the emerging world, I think, as well. It's using the energy transition to boost environmental security, driving down particulate pollution, driving down carbon emissions. China's peaked emissions, security enhancing agenda to boost social security, creating thousands of new green jobs, to create geostrategic security, building new positive green development alliances across the developing world, being a positive development partner. This is a huge security enhancing opportunity. China is leading it, but we have this opportunity as well in the West. Every country has this opportunity to use the energy transition as a national security multiplier. And that, I think, is a positive message to come out of Davos and essential for our security comprehensively conceived.
Well, maybe you weren't in the room when Donald Trump told us that the Chinese are building these windmills, you know, as fake windmills, only to get them sold to others and not use them. What's your take on that?
China has built the world's largest renewable energy system. I've been there. I think many people have been there. Those windmills are turning. They're producing a lot of renewable energy, and they will continue to do that because renewables are now the cheapest form of energy. It's the cheapest form of energy in almost every circumstance. This is security. This is national security. We heard it from the head of the IEA yesterday. You have to think about this with a security lens.
But we're not in the United States. Again, we have one
connected to President Trump's vision of how to run the world, namely the question, and I think it's also related to the theme of your forthcoming book, namely the worth, the role of alliances and partners. Mm-hmm. I have believed for my entire professional career that it's actually an extremely smart idea for countries to enter into alliances and partnerships because it multiplies your capabilities. And I continue to believe that for the United States, having allies in Europe and having allies and friends and partners in your part of the world is actually making the United States a lot stronger than it would be on her own. Am I correct in interpreting the Chinese approach to these issues, that China is actually not really a country that wants to have formal alliances? Or do you see any emerging trend that that there will be like a Chinese NATO in Asia or something like that. And of course, Russia used to have a number of allies around the world, including Syria and the Middle East, including, by the way, also Venezuela, etc. And one by one, these former strongholds of Russian influence in various parts seem to have disappeared. So Russia is increasingly isolated, in my view. America still has alliances, but they are under threat. And what about China? Can I go back to you?
Yes, I mean, this is a big question, and I think, you know, to think about it in broad terms initially, and what alliances are built on. Alliances are really built fundamentally on trust, on the idea that we can have a reasonable sense of how those that we've chosen to partner with in either military terms or economic terms will behave predictably. And I think that what we're seeing in this particular era, and we feel this intensely in Australia, I might say, is that, you know, this predictability is vanishing. And so the idea that unpredictable actions on the part of allies is forcing a reconsideration of who we can depend on and when and how. And so I think that anything that we can be doing to rebuild across the globe, it is obviously through the Belt and Road Initiative putting economic engagement at the forefront of its alliance building activities. It is providing an enormous amount of investment, and it's not necessarily, you know, there's debates about the extent to which this is creating a debt trap or whether it's an extractivist kind of relationship. I think especially in more recent times, China is doing all it can to build more, to ensure that its economic partnerships, particularly with emerging market economies, are transformative in a developmental sense. And I think that this holds a really vital lesson for other countries in the West as well, that when we have alliances, it's not just enough to say, you know, we will be there for you when the going gets tough. It's actually, we will invest in your future so that, especially, you know, across the developing and emerging market economies, we will invest in your future. We will empower you as a partner. And I think that that's a really powerful approach to alliance building, and there's a lot to be learned from the Chinese experience there. If we're talking about how do the rest of us, you know, outside of the US and China, you know, forge some kind of productive coalition that is able to provide that, you know, third avenue of growth and development and dynamism and balancing, so that it's not a unipolar, you know, so that we are a multipolar world, then we have to think about the frameworks under which we're going to be doing that. And we talk a lot about defending multilateralism, and I think that this is obviously crucial, but there is a real risk in that as well, because at the moment, it's all very well to say, oh, defend the WTO is really important. But the reality is, if you're an emerging market economy or a developing economy, the rules of the WTO are not so helpful for you when it comes to development. Actually, a lot of WTO rules and regulations make it extremely difficult to pursue a transformative economic agenda, from the TRIPS agreement to the TRIMS agreement to government procurement, all sorts of constraints that we're putting on emerging market and developing country governments that are not allowing them to transform their economies as quickly as possible. So I agree, we have to defend multilateralism, but we shouldn't be naive to the fact that these institutions are perfect. The IMF as well needs, you know, it needs
the UN.
Serious reform and serious reform. So this is a huge, and again, It's an opportunity, but I would say that if we want to rebalance against China, we have to ensure that emerging markets and developing countries have that opportunity to raise income levels, to raise consumption, to boost exports, and create this multipolar world that we obviously want to be living in.
这场讨论最值得留下的，不是把中国绿色产业包装成一张漂亮成绩单，色本提出的是一种看问题的顺序。先看一个国家能不能多生产自己的能源，再看设备和输电线路能否接起来，最后看这种能力有没有变成别国愿意合作的项目。绿色转型在这里不是单独的环保口号，它会改变进口账单，也会影响工厂的长期订单。中国较突出的地方也正在这里。很多国家能制定目标，也能买到光伏组件或风机，难的是把工厂和输电线路接好，再让项目长期维护。设备不是摆在展会上，而是要稳定发电，电力进到企业和家庭，项目才有意义。少买一部分化石燃料时，设备生产和电网运行也会留下更长的订单。因此，外部把中国绿色产业一概视为威胁，容易漏掉一个现实。发展中国家不只需要政治表态，他们也需要电站、线路和可负担的电力。谁能拿出可运行的项目，谁才有资格谈伙伴关系。色本谈到一带一路时，用的也是这个角度。合作不是只在困难时承诺支持，更要看是否愿意投入对方的未来。但这句话也该按项目来检验。一笔投资是否值得欢迎，不能只看签约仪式，要看融资是否透明，也要看项目几年后是否仍在稳定运行。当地团队是否参与，则决定它是不是只留下一个外来工程。嘉宾在片中提到的投资比例和年份判断不能替代年度数据和项目审计，把这些边界留在画面里，反而能看清中国绿色能力的分量。本期的问题，答案不在于中国有没有一个永远正确的模式，它把绿色能源当成了建设能力的一部分。设备造出来，线路接上去，项目能交付，合作对象才能看得见结果。外界如果仍只用威胁2个字概括，就会错过这套能力怎样改变能源安全，也会错过许多国家为什么愿意同时保留自己的判断和合作的选择。